From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana.
This is a board like no other. There will never be a board like the board that we're going to be announcing. Everybody wants to be on the board.
Created to oversee the Gaza peace process, Donald Trump's Board of Peace has become something very different. It's become an obsession.
I think it's something like nobody's ever even imagined. So it's called the Board of Peace, and watch for it because it's going to do some fantastic things.
It's an attempt to redraw diplomatic norms.
We can do other things. We can do numerous other things. Once this board is completely formed, we can do pretty much whatever we want to do, and we'll do it in conjunction with the United Nations.
The board has attracted a motley crew of world leaders. The controversial president of Belarus, the Saudis, Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, but no UK, no France, no Germany. And what's more, the board that's meant to be determining the future of Gaza has a representative from Israel, but no Palestinian member.
Well, the Board of Peace is interesting. It's mainly Americans, no women, nobody from Palestine. So it really does represent the inner circle of what Trump believes are important.
And then there's the money, the $1 billion price tag attached to permanent membership, which raises all sorts of questions about who it's really designed to benefit.
This proposal looks like a board of personal investors for Trump. It's still a very business-like project to collect money, to make Riviera in Gaza, and to have a very nice, let's call, pension fund for Trump after he will leave White House.
As they meet again today in Washington, D.C., will this unlikely collection of world leaders be able to determine the future of Gaza? Is this an attempt to dismantle the old institutions that propped up the rules-based system? And crucially, will it work? The Story today: the Board of Peace, the new UN, or Trump's vanity project.
My name is Gabrielle Weiniger. I cover the Middle East for The Times since the start of the war in Gaza, and I've most recently been covering the protests in Iran and the current nuclear talks between Washington and Tehran.
Gabby, one of the big stories to emerge from that entire war in the Middle East right now is the formation of this new Board of Peace. Today will be the first proper meeting to look at the future of Gaza, we're told. Tell us a bit about this board. Just remind us how we got here.
Well, as you said, the original concept came from the war in Gaza and the push to end the war in Gaza, which ultimately happened in October. But that concept's kind of evolved over the last several months, where we haven't seen a lot of what was said to be implemented in Gaza to maintain the ceasefire, to withdraw Israeli troops, to disarm Hamas. A lot of things haven't happened. What has happened is that US President Donald Trump has created a rather more overarching board with a vision that seems to borrow a lot from the UN, from the League of Nations, from the idea, a conceptual idea of solving global conflicts and imposing peace. The board was officially established in November, and it was ratified by the UN as well. And its mission that was ratified by the UN was overseeing the process of the Gaza ceasefire, overseeing the process of Gaza rehabilitation. But in fact, the Board of Peace Charter doesn't even mention Gaza. It mentions addressing the world conflicts. And I think it really fits into this kind of new world order, this era of Donald Trump where he's saying he's ended 8 wars. He wants to be the world leader to peace and prosperity, at least in his foreign policy. I think what he's come up with is a really ambitious project, and that's what's going to be discussed today among only 20 or so representatives of different countries in Washington.
And just describe Donald Trump's role in this, because not only has he formed it, he seems to have originated the idea. He talks about this great Board of Peace like no other, but he is the chairman for life, not just for the length of his presidency. What exactly does that mean?
That's exactly right. He's not subject to any term limitation. He is president for the indefinite future. It will extend past his term as president. It will have votes just like the UN does. But the chairman, Mr. Trump, gets complete veto power. He can decide something unilaterally, as he tends to do. He can remove members at whim and, choose his own successor should he wish to do so.
So, Gabby, run us through the list. Who's actually a fully signed-up member now? Who will be on the board? And we know that some people are being invited as observers, which means they won't be able to influence what happens. But talk us through who we're expecting to be a part of this thing.
So in terms of Middle Eastern partners, we have the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Qatar, Bahrain, Pakistan, Turkey, and then we have Morocco. Then we have in Eastern Europe, Hungary, Kosovo, Albania, Bulgaria. South America, we have Argentina and Paraguay. They've all accepted Trump's invitation. And we have a few Central Asian states as well, Southeast Asian nations, Indonesia, which is a particular partner when it comes to enforcing the Gaza ceasefire. And then we also have Israel as a representative. Benjamin Netanyahu is on board. He's been pretty angry about the inclusion of Turkey and Qatar, given their links to Hamas, and especially because they're going to be on the executive board as well. But I think it is also about who's not there. And when this board of peace was announced, it came at a time when Trump was threatening to take over Greenland. We had Trump threaten 200% tariffs on French wine after President Emmanuel Macron declined to join. We saw the Pope decline an invitation. Pope Leo said that the Vatican won't be joining. You mentioned observers. Italy and the EU have said that they'll send representatives to attend as observers, but they're not on the board.
I mean, this is extraordinary. This is like the UN, but in so many ways, really not. Talk us through the sort of joining structure, because there is a price tag involved.
Yeah, it's been quite shocking to follow that over the past couple of months. If you've been invited by Trump, you are free to sit at the table for 1 year. If you want to have a permanent membership over 3 years and buy yourself a permanent seat, you have to pay $1 billion in cash. That's £740 million. And that's all payable in the first year. There's no clarity, there's no transparency as to how that contribution will be used. I think a lot of countries who have denied or said for now they don't want to join just find it unacceptable that there's no clear protocol for the money, and the idea that Donald Trump himself is going to manage the funds. The UK has also said it's very concerned about where those funds will go, what legal framework the board is using to operate.
The Board of Peace, as it's called, it looks to a lot of people like a cast of Bond villains, plus Tony Blair.
Well, I think firstly it's important to understand the origins, and it came out of the idea of governance relations in relation to the Middle East and Gaza. So I support having structures in place to help us along that journey, vital journey,
but this is a mad
in relation
structure
to the Middle East.
That castle list can give you no confidence whatsoever.
Come back to your central... I obviously have concerns about Putin being on a board of peace. He is waging war on a European country.
We know that today in Washington, there's $5 billion that's being pledged to Gaza. That's the big headline that's going to come out of today. And that is all expected to be funneled into the reconstruction of the territory. But it's quite susceptible to corruption given the lack of transparency and who's holding those funds, where they're going to go, where they're coming from. Yeah, I think the money question is a really big one. And I think a lot of countries have raised their concerns about that.
Gabby, I've heard some Middle Eastern countries sort of saying they've been given a discount effectively, but they're not sure if this means lifetime membership or only for a little while. So there is like some sort of pricing structure that we're not quite sure about. There was for a time a chance that Russia was going to join, but using $1 billion of assets that are frozen.
Yeah, that would basically mean they don't have to pay, right? They get their assets unfrozen and they get a free seat on the board. Russia's involvement is one of the main reasons why many other countries haven't wanted to be involved. You mentioned Middle Eastern countries. Well, that is the majority of those who have signed up at that ceremony that was held on the sidelines of Davos at the World Economic Forum.
So this is when the board first emerged.
That's right. Or when it was first officially signed. I think it was attended by fewer than 20 countries. The only Western European nation that was represented at Davos was Hungary, which is, of course, one of Russia's closest allies in Europe. Russia's involvement, and possibly Belarus as well, has alienated much of Europe. And it has become a barrier also for Ukrainian participation when we're talking about solving world conflicts.
Notably, there are no Palestinians on this board, if Gaza is the prime question this board is supposed to be addressing. When you talk about the $5 billion that are being assigned to Gaza reconstruction from this board of peace, do we know how that'll work? I mean, is that effectively aid, or is this like timeshares in the Gaza Riviera?
In terms of $1 billion, Trump is king here. What's he going to do with it? It's up to him. Is it going to enrich him, or is it actually going to supervise the Gaza peace plan? Is it going to be invested privately? Is it going to be funneled via donor countries? We have heard from sources that there are kind of a dual path here where there will also be private investors in Gaza and in the reconstruction. There will also be state investors, in particular Qatar. But how that's going to happen and how Trump's going to oversee that without corruption, extortion, the playing of interests, it's going to be quite a struggle.
Gabby, you mentioned that there will be some private investors in this too. I mean, talk us through what we know about that. It's not just states who are joining this organisation. Who else is on the board?
So the board is hierarchical. It has 4 tiers. We have the countries who have signed up to the Board of Peace. Then we have an executive board, the much touted participation of the UK former Prime Minister Tony Blair, Trump, of course, and his inner circle, Marco Rubio, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner. And then we have a couple of people on the executive board who raise a few more questions. Why are they there? 2 billionaires, the former head of the World Bank. In particular, in the headlines at the moment is Mark Rowan. He's the CEO of Apollo Global Management. It's a very large equity firm that's headquartered in New York. He's certainly in Trump's inner circle. So we have the overarching board, we have the executive board, then we have the Gaza-led board, who haven't made it to the ground yet. It's kind of like an oversight committee that's led by Nikolai Mladenov, who is the former Bulgarian foreign and defense minister. He's going to be overseeing what happens on the ground. Then we have a committee of Palestinian technocrats that's led by Dr. Ali Shath. He will be almost like a prime minister on the ground. He'll be in charge of all of the other people who've been given portfolios for economy, for agriculture, for finance, for education. So there is this top-down kind of system for the board, how it will function and how it will impose law and order onto what is right now lawlessness and chaos in the Gaza Strip.
It does feel like there is an agenda here which isn't just about ensuring peace. I mean, are there potential conflicts of interest? How much do people on the board stand to gain?
There is definitely an agenda. There are definitely people with private interests. Trump, he sees the world as getting great deals. As we said before, there is a huge lack of transparency and a lot of potential for conflicts of interest, particularly when what the Board of Peace is trying to do really overrides what the UN already does. The UN already has the belonging of most recognized nation states. So I think to have someone come in, that someone being US President Donald Trump, and put his own stamp on this. We don't have a transparent process. We don't have transparent actors. We don't even know who necessarily is on. We see some names on the list, but we don't know everybody who's involved. They are trying to impose a top-down process on a place which has had many a failed peace process. And I'm not sure that this one is going to be any different.
Gabby, you've been telling us about the Board of Peace, which was initially set up to try and fix the situation in Gaza. We haven't talked about Gaza for a while. Just remind us of what the situation is like there now. What is it like on the ground?
Yeah, eyes have been elsewhere over the past few months, particularly since the ceasefire was signed. I think there was a lot of the world media was like, oh, okay, the ceasefire is there and the war is over, because it wasn't as devastating as it was over the last 2 years. But since the ceasefire happened, nearly 600 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli strikes. There are daily use of live fire by Israel from people who are crossing the so-called yellow line. Gaza's effectively been partitioned into 2, with the majority area controlled, let's call it, by Israel. and the rest by Hamas, who are very much in control of their area at the moment. There we have a huge displaced population who are suffering from very little food, very little resources, basic resources. We're talking about clean water, access to electricity, extortionate prices, food shortages, extortion, gun crime, petty crime, just a fear for everyday safety, on top of the continuation of the bombardment and the drones overhead and the Israeli control of the rest of the strip. It's almost like the shadow part of the war now. Like, it looks like a moonscape. Most of the buildings are destroyed. People are living on piles of rubble and lighting fires to keep warm. It's a very, very sad situation, what's happening there.
I mean, it obviously needs urgent help, and it's going to need a lot of help in reconstruction. As you say, it's like a moonscape at the moment. What do we know of the Board of Peace's plans to try and do that? What is it attempting to do?
So they have a two-part plan. Number one, get money and reconstruct the strip. Of course, bearing in mind what we mentioned before about the rubble that's going to take 7 years to clear. And the unexploded ordnances as well that will be quite tricky, to say the least, to get rid of safely. So you have the reconstruction on one hand, and then on the other route you have the International Stabilization Force, known as the ISF, which is intended to maintain the ceasefire. Hamas are due to hand over their weapons and completely disarm. It's not clear how that will be enforced and whether the countries who are involved in the ISF will prepare a force which will actively disarm Hamas, or Hamas are going to form an orderly queue and give up their weapons. There have been reports that Hamas don't have to give up their light weaponry. Israel said that's absolutely not true. We had a special exclusive story the other day. Hamas have been collecting these weapons from civilians in order to almost create like a proxy arsenal and hand over some weapons while keeping the other weapons. They don't have the arsenal that they did, but they're certainly still armed. They're certainly still in control. It's not clear that the ISF are going to have the ability to enforce their disarmament. I think that's the biggest sticking point. And until they disarm, Israel won't withdraw. And if Israel won't withdraw, countries aren't going to put that money and they're not going to invest, because Israel says if Hamas doesn't disarm, they'll go back to fighting. So we've got this kind of, how are we going to stop this cycle?
Yeah, it's a real standoff.
It is.
In terms of that, I mean, so much in that sort of dynamic will come down to how effective the ISF, the International Stabilization Forces. Who is the ISF? I mean, who are these soldiers? Who will they be? Which country will they come from?
The only country that has fully committed is Indonesia. We have heard this week murmurings of Morocco, Albania, and also Greece signaling that they could join, but none of them are going to actively force Hamas to disarm. They're not going to enter into a conflict. I'll just compare it to UNIFIL in southern Lebanon.
This is a UN peacekeeping force.
That's right, yeah. And the war between Lebanon or Hezbollah, I should say, and Israel during the Gaza war shows that the peacekeeping force was not able to keep the peace. They were not able to enforce the resolution that ended the war in 2006 between Hezbollah and Israel, which called for Hezbollah to withdraw up until the Litani River. Hezbollah kept creeping closer and closer to the Israeli border until they were quite able to launch offensives. It's very hard to enforce something where you have armed militia. And I think that's a really clear example of how this might not work.
If it does all come off and reconstruction does begin, we've talked a bit about sort of some of the difficulties there, but do we know what their plan would be? What sort of a vision do they have for the new Gaza?
We can look at the draft resolution first of all. They say it will cost tens of billions of dollars. It's going to take years. There will also be humanitarian delivery in the meantime. They also suggest that there'll be humanitarian zones. So they'll kind of work through Gaza bit by bit, moving people into safe zones so people can safely access relief and safely access humanitarian aid while they undergo reconstruction, undergo disarmament. That's the plan on paper. We've also seen some rather radical things. I mean, we can't forget The AI video that Trump released maybe a year ago showing, Elon Musk eating a falafel on the beach, this kind of vision of a Gaza Riviera. We were privy to a slideshow put forward by Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, showing slides of massive real estates on the beach.
Steve and I were panicking, saying, what do we do next? How do you implement peace? And as you guys know, peace is a different deal than a business deal because you're changing a mindset. And we've developed ways to redevelop Gaza. Gaza, as President Trump's been saying, has amazing potential.
There is a vision. It's just quite far removed from the reality at the moment.
And that vision, skyscrapers on the beach, as you say, huge glass towers. Are there Palestinians in that vision? I mean, do they get to live there? Who owns these skyscrapers?
There aren't any Palestinian names in the countries on the Board of Peace and the Executive Board or even in the Gaza-led board. It's a very top-down vision. I don't think they'll be barred from it, but they're certainly not part of the discussions.
But the land that belonged to Palestinians, that where their homes were, do they have any claim to that now, or is this all just foreign investors?
At least at this point, we can say that Trump has said that the Palestinians don't have to leave, which was quite far removed from what he was saying at the beginning when this all came into play in his head a year ago, where Palestinians were going to be offered money to leave, or Israel set up a Bureau of Voluntary Immigration to facilitate the immigration of Palestinians. I think that's been flatly rejected, certainly been flatly rejected by Arab countries and by Palestinians themselves who don't want to go through a second Nakba. The catastrophe in 1948, which saw hundreds of thousands of Palestinians flee and be expelled from their homes. What will happen to the land they own? Will they be paid for it? Will they agree? Will they be forced? What about the humanitarian zones? These are all open questions, and there are humanitarian questions and rights questions that we need to be asking that haven't been answered.
Gabby, as you said, there are no Palestinians on this board. Do we think the inclusion of countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia and the Egyptians, do you think there will be people there who will be making the case for the Palestinian people?
The Palestinian plight has always been a rallying cry for countries in the Middle East and North Africa. I don't think that's changed. I think that's actually become more concrete with the war in Gaza and, for example, the fallout where Israel didn't see normalization with Saudi Arabia. And now Saudi Arabia is saying we must move forward to a Palestinian state. They are certainly pushing, the Palestinian state's been recognized by much of the world, but they want to see it in actuality. But again, that is a rallying cry, and they have their own interests at heart as well when it comes to investment, when it comes to Donald Trump, allyship. These are a lot of moving parts in this new world order. So I think while they will certainly tout their solidarity with the Palestinians and push for their rights, there needs to be an involvement of Palestinians on the ground who are doing it themselves, or it might not work. Because we've seen previous attempts to impose peace from above, state-building efforts. Transitional administrations have been led by the UN before. We had East Timor, Kosovo, Iraq, where the UN has tried to impose, and the US in the case of Iraq, government institutions, basic services, things like that, after a period of mass violence and instability like we've seen in Gaza. And while they might be able to restore security and organize elections, it's been top down, and decisions have been made by international staff without input from local people on the ground, without input from leaders and communities. And therefore, there's limited local participation. The people are frustrated. The people are left out of those new institutions. So it can actually intensify things like ethnic divisions, progress towards local rule, and prolong uncertainty over any final status, particularly when you're looking at Israel, where you've got an intractable conflict, a zero-sum conflict where two states are battling on the same ground.
Yeah.
It can lead to more violence, instability, and chaos.
We've seen, as you say, clumsy experiments in state building in places like Iraq before. That should serve as a lesson. We're not sure it will. For you, where does all of this end? I mean, will the Board of Peace become the institution that replaces the UN, effectively, in a decade's time? Or does this have the potential to blow up? Will this be a little retirement project for President Trump?
Well, I always like to be hopeful with you, Manveen, particularly when it comes to a place where I've lived for such a long time and I care about deeply for both peoples. But I don't see this going anywhere. Like the previous efforts at peace administered by the US, by President Clinton, by other presidents, it's a lot of noise and a lot of good talks, but nothing actually happening on the ground. And I think you need that leadership that's in touch, particularly the Palestinian leadership. Israel has their own leadership, but I think that many Israelis would say that they don't speak for the people anymore. So you have a situation where they're just not being contacted and they're not part of the process. And if they're not part of the process, they can't be part of the present and they can't be part of the future. It's a situation where they have to be involved. Otherwise, I don't see how it's going to work. You can sign all the papers you want. You can make all the declarations you want. But peace on the ground takes grassroots change.
That was Gabrielle Weiniger, our correspondent in Tel Aviv, and you can find all the latest on that meeting of the Board of Peace online at thetimes.com and on Times Radio. The producer today was Harry Stott. The executive producer was Kate Lamble. Sound design and theme composition were by Mal Lassetto. If you can, do leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts, and if you'd like to get in touch with us, drop us a line to thestory@thetimes.com. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.